Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode. This is your host, Eric. Today, I'm joined by the Antonio Neves. Tony, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Man, honored to be here. So glad to be connected to you. And I'm really excited that, I don't know how it happened, but we got connected over social media. You know, a lot of people complain about social media these days, but it is now and then a great opportunity to connect with like-minded folks who are committed to growing, who are committed to getting better. And I can tell you the work that you're doing, not just for the blue community, but also the community in general. It's positive, it's uplifting. So I'm glad to be here.
No, thanks, man. I'll spit back everything you're putting my way. I appreciate it. And likewise, I am 99% sure I heard you on another podcast, and it was very much your tone. It was very much the things you're talking about as far as men, community, taking ownership of basically taking your life by the reins. And so it was a lot of those things that I very much try to be about. So I think that's where I started following you. And then after starting this podcast for a bit, just reaching out, and yeah, it was awesome to chat with you prior to all this and kind of get connected and get to know a little bit more about each other. But yeah, I mean, we'll just talk about like man morning,
Yeah.
like that.
I'm talking man morning, but I also want to just acknowledge just your
Yeah.
persistence. Obviously, all of us are busy with work, with families, with spouses, different responsibilities around the house, careers, multiple jobs, different things going on. And I was in a season when you initially reached out when there was just so much going on. And I think a lot of people, whether they're trying to get someone on a podcast or they just want to connect, we reach out once, maybe twice, and then we stop. And one thing I appreciated about you, that you were persistent, kindly. Because I think you have to preface persistent with kindly, persistent. And to your point, and maybe we'll get into this, and this is why I think I like how you show up, and maybe it's just a byproduct of your experience and the work that you do. If you read any of my work, Stop Living on Autopilot, other books, if you've ever worked with me as a coach, heard me on other podcasts, I'm direct, I'm raw, I'm to the point. I'm a firm believer that most men don't need another pat on the back. What we need is someone to look them in the eyes and tell them the truth, to tell them what's up. And I had a buddy just recently, a good buddy of mine. I was meeting with my man Morning Crew, and he's like, you put a few pounds on this past season, huh, my man? And he said it in a way that was disarming. I didn't get defensive. It was correct. There's probably 12 pounds on this body right now that I don't need. But just that acknowledgement by him and him saying, hey, what can I do to support you, was amazing. And he told me the truth in a kind way. So I think that's what I think folks like to hear from me. And that's what I like to hear from you. You know, the direct, raw, unfiltered truth.
No, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, because I very much appreciate the message and what you're putting out. I think we do need more of it, right? Like I've talked numerous times about my own tenuous relationship with my dad, and I think that is, you want to call it an epidemic or a trend or what have you. I think it is one of our as far as like Western culture, or just let's make it America, right? One of our biggest social ills that directly interfaces with all the issues we have going on with just relation and just building up walls and the polarizing nature of our country at times through the media, but also, I mean, criminal justice, right? And so not to go totally down that road, but like we need more mentors, but we also need more fellowship, right? More brotherhood and just connection, right? Like you explained that story about your buddy calling you out, right? Just, a little bit of accountability, a little bit of nudge, but you felt where it was coming from because you had the relationship, right? So it's not like I'm just going to go to my neighbor down the street. I've only lived here for a couple months and be like, hey, man, what are your lifestyle choices looking like?
What's going on? And I even like to frame it differently. Yeah, I think a lot of people, we say call out. I think men who are in your corner, they call you up. They call you up to be a better version of yourself. And you touched on something briefly that's really important, fathers. And if you look at the outcomes of kids, specifically boys, who are raised in homes with fathers and homes without fathers, two different outcomes. And you probably experienced this in your work as well. If you probably
Oh yeah.
dig in to who you're picking
Mm-hmm.
up, who's getting into consistent trouble. And it's been a challenge for me throughout my life. I had a challenging relationship with my dad at times. My parents divorced when I was young, and that manifested all the way to when I became a father, 8 years ago, that I didn't know what it meant to be a father because I didn't see that example day in and day out. I just saw the Cosby Show, and lo and behold, who knew what he was doing behind the scenes?
Yeah.
But also, even being a husband, I never saw a relationship work firsthand. Between my mom and dad are 6 different divorces, not to each other, thankfully. So
Mm-hmm.
these are things you have to learn learn on your journey, and through men. I like to put the word mentorship in there, and it makes a
Mm.
really big difference. And my dad died about a year ago. He had dementia for a long time, and I think him dying, obviously sad, it's tragic. You miss your father. Didn't have him really for the past 5 years because he had dementia. But it's interesting because now all of a sudden I feel like I'm now officially Mr. Neves,
Oh
if you
yeah.
will.
Taking on the
I
mantle. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get to create a story that I want to create for my kids, for my house, for our legacy. And I think so much with legacy, we always talk about dollars and cents, right? Legacy and what are you going to leave? Generational wealth. And I think we got it all wrong, man. Real generational wealth, taking your kids to school, man. Real
Yeah.
generational wealth is being in that household. Real generational wealth is being a great example for your kids with your spouse, right? So I know I'm going a lot of different directions right now,
Mm-hmm. I'm
but
trying to keep up, and I love it
yeah,
all.
we don't talk enough about these things, man.
No, that's huge. I think that was a focus point of one of your blogs, right? Like one of your newsletters. You're talking about your relationship with your dad, and you're talking about legacy and what we leave behind. And I'm in this kind of the state mandated leadership course because I just had a recent promotion. So every promotion you have to go through, basically several weeks of training. But what I actually love about this, it's not it. It gets some eye rolls when you talk about emotional intelligence, especially in the first responder community. But I think less and less so when they actually think about brass tacks, like what it is. It's like, hey, it's just like meeting people halfway and trying to have uh, self-aware and awareness of others in communication, so you can build a better team, right? You can have good relationships. And so when you think about that, and when people take a step back and they think about all the coworkers or bosses that they had some issue with, which everyone has had some or multiple, right? Then they're like, well, shoot, like I wish that was appreciated in leadership. I wish that was part of the, ascension in an organization, the process, right? But I bring that up to say, like, when we think about legacy, one of the things was like leadership legacy. And I think when we talk about family, like you are the leader, right? The parents are the leader of your family, and what you create, the environment, all the interactions that you have, all these things are learned behavior, right? So if you're providing it, it's learned. If you're not providing it, it's learned, and that is a legacy, right? So even getting on, right, like us hopping on this call, on this interview, yeah, life happens and it goes in waves, and you got kid stuff to go, later today, but that's very much like that's the stuff, and that's the important things, is how you show up. And um I'm also like going a lot of different directions, but even in there, you were able to find a time that worked today, and you're able to hop in and do your habit stacking push-ups when you're making your coffee. So
All because of you, because
fist bump, man.
all because of you and what you shared. And I think the leadership role in the household and the community is so underlooked. I don't know if underlooked is a word, but we don't talk about it enough. And it took me a long time, man. I'm in my mid 40s, and it took me years to realize, especially with my kids, when I'm trying to teach a lesson. I grew up in the era where your parents told you what to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh
And
yeah.
heck, I grew up in an era when you got spanked.
Yep, me
And,
too.
these kids will never know what it's like to have a
Yeah.
hand on their butt from their dad, right? Even though I look at them sometimes.
Yep.
um,
Yep.
but, I'm learning, it's not telling, it's they observe, it's showing them, it's being that example of how I speak to my wife, it's being that example of taking the plate to the sink. It's, oh, I got up, it's only 6:30, and dad already got in a workout and is dressed and has breakfast done, right? It's those kind of things that you don't need to say. I think a lot of parenting, when I observe, it's just the telling, telling, telling. And by the way, this is also the same thing in the workplace. I work with so many organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I think people think that leadership is just telling people what to do. Nah, man, you got to be the example of what you want. And so few people are. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
so it makes a difference.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like we talk about leadership a lot on this podcast, so I think that's a great point to expand on a little bit because you're absolutely right. Like being a boss is different than being a leader, right? If you're compelling by virtue of your title and the powers that come with it, and if someone doesn't do what they're told, then there's a repercussion, right? Up to the level of termination. If ultimately everyone telling you to do something, and you're like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like it's your job, but like leadership is getting people to follow you. Like voluntarily, that's the gold level, right? That's the gold standard. So no, I love how you put that out. And uh
It's
man,
a good
even talking about,
reminder. Sorry to
yeah.
interrupt. It's a good reminder. And again, I work with a lot of organizations across the country, doing keynotes, but also doing
Hmm.
leading group coaching programs. And a lot of times for emerging leaders who just got that promotion or are leading people for the first time. And I want to remind them that if you ever have to remind someone that you're their boss, you messed up.
Dude.
You messed up somewhere early on. If you
Yeah.
ever find yourself saying, I'm your boss, you have to do this, like, yeah, son, you missed that opportunity. And you're going to have to do a lot of work to make up for that. And it's the example, it's having the track record, it's the discipline, it's making them part of the vision, making them see that this is why we are doing this. This is the outcome, getting them on the bus, like my friend, the author John Gordon would say, who wrote the book, The Energy Bus. And yeah, I've seen a lot of great leaders and a lot of bad leaders. And a lot of the great leaders, they don't have to remind people or tell them what to do,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, respect, oftentimes is earned. It's not like because you asked for it, right? So, classic note, I think, for a lot of listeners is when you have someone that's throwing around seniority, right? Like, oh, I'm the senior account manager, or I'm the senior officer. Like, you should never have to say that. Like, if you are demonstrating your value, and usually that's through relationship, through mentoring, through all these things, and your experiences is clear, then people will show up for you, right? They will regard what you're saying, not because you have to put an asterisk on it. Yeah, yeah, I know you've been here a long time, but it's ironic that when you say that, you're actually not acting like it.
That's great. I've seen it all the time in the workplace. I've been there 23 years, and I'm
Hmm.
like, okay,
Why are we having this conversation,
Why
right?
are we? Yeah, what's going on? Congratulations.
Hmm.
And are things improving? Are things getting better? Are you making progress? Do people want to follow you? Do people want to join you? And a lot of times that's not the case. And I think that's kind of the old school mantra as well. Obviously, there was a time when people worked for the same company for many, many years, and they
Hmm.
didn't change careers and professions like we do today. And seniority was a thing. And, it's interesting now that we think about it is that in life, there's always been certain levels, right? Maybe you graduate from high school, maybe you go to college and you get a degree, and then you get into the workplace. And over time, you slowly stack up these different titles, these different levels of seniority. Obviously, in your profession, you can look on someone's uniform and see what they've been doing,
Hmm.
and you earn something, and it denotes that this person has been through X, Y, and Z or accomplished that. What's interesting nowadays, and especially for folks like us who are raising young kids, feels like a lot. I feel like a lot of that's going away. And I would like my kids to be able to show up without any external markers of success and feel confident in who they are. I think the way I think about this, I've been speaking on stages for over 12 years now. Sometimes the audience is as large as 6,000 people. Sometimes it's just 300 people. And I remember I used to always wear the standard speaker uniform, nice slacks, button down shirt, crisp blazer, and the
Hmm.
nice loafers to get on that stage and denote that type of I'm the speaker, I'm the
Yeah,
guy
it's like
you
a
hired,
TED Talk uniform, right?
the TED Talk guy, the TED Talk
Yeah,
uniform.
yeah.
Then at some point, man, that got exhausting. And I was a TV guy for a long time, so I knew what it was like to wear the TV uniform and talk in that reporter voice,
Hmm.
where it sounds nothing like you. I remember at some point I shifted dressing up like me when I got on stages. Jeans, t-shirt, dope chore jacket, nice pair of kicks. And I
Yeah,
remember being so afraid because I thought that, oh, I don't look the part anymore. And something interesting happened. The more I showed up like me and frankly didn't look like anyone in the audience, the more they put me on a higher pedestal,
yeah,
the more respect I actually earned because I wasn't trying to fit in. And that's not a negative attack on how other people dress by no means. I just said I'm
yeah.
going to show up as me, and I don't need this suit to demonstrate that I am somebody. I am somebody. It's like social media. So many people, kids always ask me, "How do you get that blue check mark
Hmm.
for social media? I see you have that on all your social profiles." And it's always fun to ask, well, first, why do you want a blue check mark?
Yeah.
And
Where's
most
that
people
coming
will
from?
say something to the tune of, I want to show that I'm important, that I'm of value. And you got to remind people sometimes that no blue check mark can verify you,
Mm.
right? We all were verified the day that we were born, and we can forget that. And I have forgot that over the course of my life. Again, we're going a lot of places here, but I
No,
appreciate your willingness to go here.
that's an awesome. I love it, man. That's an awesome example. You know, what I hear is like people are looking for validation, and you know, it's almost like, you know, to love someone else, you have to love yourself first, and it's a corny saying, but it's so true, right? Like, how can you demonstrate that unless you actually give yourself some grace, give yourself some credit, and in that, like, it's validation, right? So you are able to show up as your most authentic self. Someone else might get into like their, you know, turn from Clark Kent into Superman when they put their tie on and they get their mind right. Like, yes, it could be a tool, and absolutely, but at the same time, man, I was literally just reading this Adam Grant in one of his books, Originals, but he's talking about creativity and innovation and breaking out of the mold. But he said that there was actually a study that looked at college professors, male college professors, and the men with beards and t-shirts showed up as more credible in polls with their students than the dude that's clean shaven and in a suit. And they were basically trying to equate and basically analyze that, and they're thinking that it's because people are showing up more comfortably and they don't have to put on the suit to get the validation. So it's almost like, yeah, you showed up like this. You believe in what you're saying, you know, wearing a t-shirt, so I sure as hell do too, right? So I think that there are different layers for sure in how we show up, and I mean, this is a very relevant conversation to my audience largely being law enforcement or first responders, because there is so much tradition, and I'm not saying tradition's bad. I'm saying we just need to recognize like where it's coming from and what parts of it are useful. But part of that was like extreme conformity, and you're seeing a little bit outside of that now with cops on social media, departments on social media. Like, they're leaning into trends and they're trying to be innovative and they're being creative, and it's solving a lot of problems that have been age old of like rinse repeat. Let's do the same thing, right? But cops also, there's an adage, and I don't know if this is across industries, you could tell me, but the only thing that cops hate more than change is things staying the same. And so we have to recognize that and question, why are we doing things we're doing? Oh, because it's in policy. Well, who wrote that policy? You know, our predecessors. Well, does it make sense anymore? Right. And I think that that's just one little example of how we can look at like the bigger systems and try to figure out like, are we actually accomplishing what we want on an individual level, but also as an organization?
I mean, you just asked two powerful coaching questions. When you look at something, and if something is working, if it's not working, or you're looking to maybe mix things up a little bit, this can be professionally, this can be in your household, this can be with your workouts that you're doing if you're not getting the results that you want. That question, why are we doing this again?
Mm-hmm.
Why? We very rarely, if ever, hit pause to do that. And first, that scares leadership, right? It scares the conformist. It scares the machine to say, why are we doing this again? People will get defensive immediately. But then that second question that you said that most people never dig into is, does it make sense to keep doing this? And really genuinely getting curious about that. That's the thing, man. Most people, when I work with coaching clients, you know, there's so many different ways to approach life, but I'll break it down to two. You can approach life like a lot of people do. You've encountered these folks. You ask them a question, or you say, does it make sense to keep doing it like this? And their response is, HMPH. They get defensive, right?
Right.
Or I love when you encounter that person who's open to learning and you say, hey, does it make sense to keep doing this? And instead of going, arms kind of crossed energy, they go,
Mm. Yeah.
I'm inviting people in this life to show up with more energy when your kid asks a question,
Mm-hmm.
when your spouse asks a question. This is a silly example, man, but sometimes when I'm driving, like I'm a detailed guy. Like if we're taking a road trip, I know what we're doing. And if all of a
You're a
sudden
planner. Yeah.
I'm a planner, and I like,
Okay. Yeah.
I was
Me
a
too.
TV guy. I used to produce shows. I know what it's like to have a minute 30, and if we're driving and my wife says out of the blue, hey, we should stop at this exit. Man, you should see how much it messes with my head. Like
It's
this
not in the
exit,
plan. It's not.
this has nothing to do with the plan. And sometimes, yeah, the answer is no if we have somewhere to be. But other times I find myself as I get older, and funny, typically it goes the other direction. I find myself going, are you open to this? And we've had some amazing exits with the family and the kids. This is another great one. Something my wife and I learned that, with young kids, busy schedules, I travel a lot. Going back to why are we doing this again? Does it make sense? The whole standard date night. We always hear, oh, what do couples have to do? You got to get your date night in. You got to get your date night in. Guess what? My wife and I have found that the last thing we want to do after the kids go to bed or after 6 o'clock is go out.
Mm,
Like, we're tired. We're
sure. Yeah.
spent. We want to.
Oh yeah.
So we're like, does this make sense? And we were like, no, it doesn't. And thank goodness to a buddy. He's like, my wife and I, now we do date mornings
Okay. Yeah.
when we're fresh and we're replenished. And I'm fortunate with my schedule, sometimes, and my wife's schedule, that we can get out during the day sometimes for that hour, an hour and a half, and actually spend quality time together when we have energy and at our best versus forcing ourselves to go to a relationship. Go to dinner.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
all because of what you just said, which most people will never ask this question and be willing to honestly answer it.
Yeah.
Does
So I
this
think
make
that
sense?
exactly. So the cursory thing would be like, why? And then they would say, well, because date nights are good because I need dedicated time. It's like, okay, now you're honing in like you need dedicated time. And so does it need to be a night, or like what are the factors of that? It's like, well, we want to be intentional, we want to be focused, and then yeah, when do you show up best? And for some people it's an evening out, and other people like, nope, it's like getting out before the rest of the world wakes up, getting a walk in, right, going to coffee. um and that may be the perfect time to bring up man morning again, because I love that notion, and because you put out the concept of man morning, like I'm doing it with some of my buddies, and it's just, if you don't, then you kind of get sucked into seeing them with the families, and then the kids are around. Kids are around. You're not having any real true conversations. I think any parent recognizes that. Like, you're just keeping, you're the bumpers in the bowling alley. You're just keeping everything kind of from havoc, right? From getting in the gutter. Um, but when you are dedicated to, hey, like this is the intent, and it is so we can talk about actual life, actual, like our marriages, we can talk about our kids, and yeah, some career stuff too. But otherwise, without the intent, it just becomes the surface level stuff. So yeah, please, you can tell us about Man Morning and then where that idea generated from.
Yeah. Well, first, most people are familiar with Man Morning now because it's a weekly newsletter that goes out every single Sunday. Basically, it's a weekly pep talk for growth-driven men who want to get better. Most of these men are fathers and husbands, and they're committed to getting better. They listen to podcasts like this. So that's how most people know it. But the origins of Man Morning happened about 8 years ago, where here in Los Angeles, a group of guys, we wanted to get together. We were new to town and wanted to just build community. And it kind of operated under this thesis that 7 or 8 a.m. coffee or tea with your friends is greater than 7 or 8 p.m. beer or cocktails with your
Mm-hmm.
friends. The intentionality is just different when you're having conversations, walk and talks over coffee or tea. Look, full disclosure, I have no problems with alcohol. I like a beer, I like a cocktail now and then.
Yep.
But we just found that the conversations that are different at 7 and 8 a.m. than they are at 7 and 8 p.m. Again, going back to when are you at your best? And we'd go on these hour-long walks. And to be clear, these are busy guys. Most of them solopreneurs, entrepreneurs with busy schedules. But we found that hour once a week truly locked us in and got us on the right path. So much so, even though it could cause a little bit of disruption in the morning routine for the people that have families, it got to the point on the mornings, Eric, when I would say, hey, I don't think I'm going to go today, she would be like, no, you need to go, because
Mm-hmm.
going back to seeing people face to face is so easy nowadays just to jump on our phones and text people and think we're really checking in with someone. We're not. That awareness that you have when you see a man eye to eye, face to face, you can read his body language and you say, how you doing, man? And he says, I'm doing good. Everything's all right. But you can have that follow-up question like, I hear you saying you're good and everything's all right, but I'm picking up something else. I hear some
Mm-hmm.
anger or some sadness. And here's what's cool about this Man Morning 1 hour walk and talk. And it's as simple as this for folks that want to have a Man Morning. You find 3 to 5 guys that are committed to getting better. You schedule a time once a week, preferably outdoors, to go for a walk and talk. And sometimes we lead with the quote or a passage and something we talk about, but most times we go to our go-to questions, and every man goes around and answers this question. As a matter of fact, would you play along? Can we do this together right now?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
We ask these 2 questions of everyone. Number 1, what are you celebrating? Personally, professionally, big or small, either. And what are you navigating personally or professionally big or small? And I want to ask you that question first, and I'll follow up why we do that. So, Eric, today, what are you celebrating, personally or professionally, big or small?
Yeah, I'm celebrating, and this is not just like novel today, but I'm celebrating an openness and an excitement about more authenticity in my life, right? Like I'm finding more groove in my professional life. I'm finding a strong balance in my personal life, managing these extra endeavors like the podcast and meeting folks. So it's a season of abundance mindset. It's coming more naturally as I intentionally think about it and as I reflect on it. And so that's what I'm super stoked about.
Good to hear. And what are you navigating, personally or professionally, big or small?
Yeah, I'm navigating a couple of relationships with people on my team at work, but at the same time, like literally 2 days ago, it was almost like a revelation. I suppose the seeds that I've been planting have been coming to fruition, right? So a lot of that's coming back around because of relationship building, right? So what used to be a very tenuous situation is finding a groove, and so while it is still a challenge, it's like the work's not done just because you had a good day. But it is validating for sure.
It's good to hear. I'm going to go briefly,
Yeah,
just since you did. I
please
want to
do.
go. I'm celebrating just the joy that my kids are showing up within the household. Mornings typically have been a bit of a big struggle getting the kids ready to go to school. We have 8-year-old twins. And I don't know, something has shifted. And my wife and I are really trying to unpack what shifted in our household, that they're waking up with a little bit more joy and not as much resistance to get the breakfast and getting their clothes on and going to school. And I'm the guy that
That's the
when I'm in
thing.
town, I take them to school. And that just feels good, man, because sometimes you can feel like you're pulling teeth at 6
Hmm.
in the morning or 6:30 and it doesn't feel good. So I'm celebrating that, and fingers crossed it lasts. Uh, I'm navigating. I have a whiteboard behind me. If you
Hmm.
saw the
I see
other
it.
side of that, that's not my daughter's drawing. You would see all of my quote unquote open apps in my life.
Mm.
And as you know, if you have a lot of open apps in business or in life, just like a computer, it slows down your processing speed
Yeah.
and can lead to a crash. As Jim Collins says in this book, Good to Great, if you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have any.
Mm.
And so I'm navigating from a business perspective all of these open apps and really getting clear down to the essential 3, maybe even 2, what they are. And I'll never forget what somebody said to me when I was in grad school. He said, "You can do anything you want, but you can't do everything." And if you
Yeah.
saw all my open apps, my man, you were like, your boy is trying to do everything.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm celebrating and navigating. And what's great about those 2 questions, and if, yeah, you can use a quote, you pull something from a Man Morning issue to talk about in a Man Morning Walk and Talk, is, in my experience, Eric, most men are emotionally constipated. Emotionally constipated.
Such
They
a
have
good phrase. Yeah.
they have right about that, and stop living on autopilot. They have a backlog of emotions, everything from joy to sadness to anger to fear. For a lot of men, it's anger that they never get out.
Hmm.
Because there's a lot of times, frankly, let's be honest, a lot of times in the household, there's not a lot of space for them to share their feelings, what's going on. We're kind of concerned about everybody else, making everyone else's temperature is okay.
Sure.
But when men, it's sometimes we do these walk and talks where I'll lead a Man Morning when I'm visiting another city. It's like somebody had a can of soda that's been shaken up nonstop, and you can hear somebody slowly opening it, letting that carbonation just slowly release.
Hmm.
And if we don't have these regular releases, open that valve up,
Yeah.
it leads to big explosions when you last need that dumb fight with your spouse, that road rage, getting mad at the person at the coffee shop over something silly.
Hmm.
There's probably a lot of folks you've pulled in over the years who've committed crimes because they were emotionally constipated
Sure.
and they
Yeah.
weren't able to get out what they were celebrating, what they were navigating, and they kept it all bottled up inside.
Yeah. That's 100%. And yeah, you say anger, and I think so much of that comes from fear because we're afraid to share that, right? We're afraid to dump on somebody or even just bridge with somebody. So often, we see these patterns going back to the earlier part of the conversation, like what we learned or didn't learn, right? As far as emotional regulation or how to show up. And I'm curious, and this question will bridge a lot of the topics we talked about. One being, your role as a dad and how you look at parenting, from getting spanked to not spanking. That's a personal experience I feel and I translate as well as like not that's not part of our parenting DNA. But at the same time, how you look at outlook and how you look at your own career and your life trajectory and what legacy you want to encourage for your children to take on. Like, have you thought about, or can you identify or explain where all that, I suppose, pattern change or pattern disruption comes from?
Um, for me, the pattern disruption comes from I think we all have that moment when it's like the before and after moment. And I had a moment early into my kids being born, like their first year. I developed going back to holding back all these emotions and all these different things. I became a secret cigarette smoker.
Mm.
And that was like my outlet for all of these things. And I'll never forget one day I was smoking a cigarette in an alley in Los Angeles. All great stories begin like that, right? I was smoking a
I'm sure.
cigarette.
Yeah.
And by the way, on the outside, externally, I was living my best life ever. If you looked at social media and all that, but I was struggling as a new father, as a husband, entrepreneur, all these different things. I was smoking the cigarette. Homeless man came up to me, what I perceived to be a homeless man. He had
Hmm.
seen much better days, asked if he could borrow a cigarette or two. I gave him a cigarette. We started smoking together, having this conversation. And he noticed I was wearing this bright green gardening glove as I smoked a cigarette. He's like, "Why are you wearing that bright green gardening glove?"
Oh,
I was
okay.
like, "Oh, I wear this glove so my wife can't smell the smoke on my hands.
Mm.
She doesn't know that I smoke." And you would have thought that we had switched roles. He looked at me like I committed a crime.
Mm.
Again, here I am, this guy traveling across the globe, doing this work as a speaker and author.
Yeah.
And here is a man who I perceived to be a homeless man who'd seen better days. And he said some words to me in that moment that I'll never forget. He said, "Hey, man, you need to figure that out. You need to figure that out."
Life
And
advice.
that right there was a disruption. It was
Yeah.
such a powerful moment. And I want to be clear that wasn't, I've had many moments like that. When you talk about pattern disruption, there were moments like that. And for me, that's a reminder that, angels can show up in the most unique places if you're open. For a cop listening, maybe somebody in the back of your car that you just picked up. There
Yeah.
still could be a lesson that you can learn from this person that maybe committed a crime. Who knows what their circumstances are, not okaying what they did. But I've had many pattern disrupts like that. And what we have to be open. And at some point, I realized, we all have these dreams, we all have these aspirations, but we have to be honest with ourselves. And a couple of things. One, it's never too late, right, to pursue these things. But the longer we wait, the harder it gets. That's why I love your hustle right now and all the things you're doing outside of your work. You don't have to be doing these things, right? This is time away from sleep. This is time away from family. Uh, I've continually remind myself that no one owes me anything, but I owe myself absolutely everything.
Yeah.
It's this willingness to look at society instead of we're so good in society pointing the finger out at everyone else, but everything changes when we point the finger at ourselves and
Yeah.
the person we look at in the mirror every single day. And also, I have to remind myself regularly that people care about me, and no one can care more about my life than I do. That I have a say in this. And so for me, when we talk about legacy and all that, I want to be an example for my kids of that. I think all great parents are just great life coaches in disguise if we do our job right. From a legacy perspective, yeah, my plan is definitely, man, leave these kids some cash and all those kind of things and
Yeah.
put some responsibility in them. But I'm not so worried about that. I want them to see dad like, yo, dad did his thing. Dad tried. I don't want to be that dude who's angry and mad when he's 60, 65 years old, saying, what if I would have did that? And I just want to know I tried. Even if it doesn't, quote unquote, work out, to know that I was in the game,
Mm-hmm.
I got off of the sidelines. For me, that will be magic. To get more personal, the season I'm in right now is, I think, long term. Everything that I do today, and I've been blessed, let's be clear, I'm not complaining. Everything I do today requires me to show up in some capacity beyond my books. So Company X hired me for a keynote. I fly to Nashville. I fly to Grand Cayman or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
Company X hires me to do a group coaching program. I Zoom in every single month via Zoom, one-on-one coaching. It all requires me to show up. So I'm in a season right now, again, going back to all those open apps I mentioned,
Yeah.
where I'm building out some things that don't require me to have to physically show up and be
Mm-hmm.
there, and what
Yeah.
that business could look like.
Yeah, that intentionality is huge, and there's so many translations, and I'm gonna kind of work it back, because if it's not clear to first responders, like I knew that there were gonna be so many nuggets that we'd cover, but that's something that everyone can recognize, especially on shift work and working nights and family, and you got all these competing interests and stressors at work and then outside of work. Yeah, like focus on what you can control, right? And so as Tony is talking about open apps, we certainly have a lot that we can we can take inventory of and potentially start, minimizing or just completely shutting down. And not to say like you got to bury that thing, but maybe at a different point, maybe at a different month, a different season, right? And so there's going to be that give and take. But I love that reflection of your, kind of aha moment. Like it became an aha moment in the alleyway with that gentleman. But for so many, if they're not in the proper place to receive it, the nudge, right? You mentioned a potential angel, right, showing up for you and for your life. That could spiral people down to a place of further guilt and shame rather than the rebound. And so I just want to focus in on. I appreciate you sharing that. That's such an impactful moment, an image of resilience, because we certainly all have them. And part of some of the things you talked about with legacy, I'm hearing you want to show up as a dude who tried, right? For himself, for his family, because that's what you want for your kids. I love that. That's what I want for my daughter. We talk about it all the time, like what her interests are, how they're kind of waning and going this way and that way. But, it's a very different model than what I was raised with, what the measure of success is, because I want her to be happy. I want her to be self-fulfilled. I want her to try. I absolutely want her to be resilient, right? But like, what tangible success, what profession, what amount of money, it's not really a thing for me, right? So
we're on the same page. And I think the last thing, not last thing, but what I want to share also, which is so critical for the audience, is if I see something that gets in the way of men making progress, healing, moving forward, is an unwillingness to write a check. As silly as that sounds, an unwillingness to write a check to invest in themselves. I'm a coach, so I get to work with amazing men across the country. I'm talking about folks who are doing amazing things, but they're willing to write a check to invest in themselves. The powerful shifts in my life have come when I had to pay money to join a group coaching program, to work with a coach, to go to therapy, to attend that conference and that event, again, where you have to hear people, when you have to see people. Yes, read books, listen to this podcast, take that online course. But if you really want to see exponential growth, exponential healing, you need to invest in yourself and be willing to do that, because listen, it pays dividends. And the returns, the ROI on investing in yourself is probably the only thing that's like, just infinite, right? You never know what that could be. But I've never seen people so resistant to slapping over some money for themselves. But they got that big ass TV in that man cave, but I can list all the things, and that's not a judgment of those things. So the question is, when are you going to put yourself first? And when you put yourself first, that has an amazing ripple effect on your wife, on your kids, your household, your community, and your work. And these are all things that you can do. And that ripple effect happens sometimes without you even saying a word, because you show up different, you look different, you feel different, you are asking different questions. That defensive dude is no longer defensive. He's open. He's asking, does this still serve me? Why am I still doing this? And that's just a moment that every man has to come to grips with himself, to know, to acknowledge he's worth the investment.
Yeah. That's so huge. And I think that is a common thing for parents, for men. Yeah, absolutely. Where, yeah, you'll throw thousands of dollars at your kids, program that lasts like 2 months, right? Like that's just the cost of doing business, because you want them to have these enriching experiences. But at the same time, like, hey, what an enriching experience they're having by having you. But if you can show up just a little bit better or a lot better as a parent, if you can better navigate all these things that is called life, if you can be more intentional, if you can push yourself better so you can show up better, like, yeah, it would seem clear that would pay dividends. So
yeah, I saw something funny on social the other day where this financial advisor was being asked by like a dad in his mid 40s about this is a dad who has not done retirement planning for himself yet. But he was asking what's the best investments he should make for his kids' education. The planner was like, for your kids' education, he's like, they have time. You don't. You need to invest in your future first, right? So sometimes we think we're doing the right thing, but we can get a little bit backwards. And we got to see ourselves as important. We got to see ourselves of value. We got to see ourselves of knowing we make a difference. And that's why it's so important to have a man morning community or a men's group, you name it, where Folks are reminding you who you are. Folks who are challenging you, who are inspiring you, who are holding you accountable and pushing you forward to be the best version of yourself. I mean, that's the goal for all of us. My hope. That's my hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think that there's so much to be gained if you are asking yourself, how are you challenging yourself, and you can't rattle off a handful of things, and that's a self check, right? And then that's a hopefully the invitation and challenge to be like, I need to set up my version of, a man morning, or I need to meet up with a mentor, or I need to ask for mentorship, right? Because that's a common thing I've heard through several years is people saying, well, I haven't been mentored. I'm like, whose fault is that, man? Right? Like, did you go to anybody? I'm like, you're coming to me now, and like, I'm happy to, right? Like, pick my brain, ask for feedback. I'll give it to you, but I don't want to give it to you unsolicited at times unless it's part of our actual, professional relationship. But like, I have so many mentors that I've gone to intentionally, right? I've set aside time. I've been relentless, right? I've followed up like I did with you, right? And so all to say, like, you just can't give up. And oftentimes it's not just going to be handed to you. And if anything, it's going to be better because you had to navigate through that and you had to endure that.
Yeah, two things on that is regarding mentors. Is I think a lot of people go about it wrong, and they go to people and say, "Will you be my mentor?" The best way to get a mentor is not letting them know that they are their mentor, your mentor. Instead, go to that person, that person who has experience in the field that you're in, that great dad you want to learn from. And instead of saying, "Will you be my mentor?" and meet with me every month for an hour,
Mm-hmm.
no, you say, "Hey, I'd like to get your advice on something.
Yeah.
I see you have expertise in this. Would you be willing to share some of that with me?" People love to tell their story. People love to be experts. And I find that I get so much out of amazing people, not by asking them to be my mentor. They don't even know that they're my mentor, but by asking for their advice, asking for their expertise on something. So that's the way around it. Second, for that man or woman who's listening to this right now and say, I hear you regarding the man morning or men's groups or whatever, but I don't know those people. They're not in my community. They're not my colleagues. They're not my coworkers. That's cool. What you can do is this, just when in doubt, find places where people go to grow. Where people go to grow, where they go to get better. I guarantee you, whatever community you live in, there is something happening every single week where people are growing with the intentionality of getting better, whether that's at a local church,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's if you have to do an online program, cool, whether that's there's so many options, and I write about this every single week, but just when in doubt, go to where people go to grow.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the gym, that's one that a lot of people can think about that, it's kind of gone by the wayside, but I did mention to someone recently, I was like, I work out at home now and I like it for so many things, but there are some times I think about what I miss about the big box gym. And at times you develop these regulars and they're not people to ever hang out with, but every now and then someone would ask for feedback and I'd ask someone for feedback and you offer a spot, right? It's community, but it's also challenging. Sometimes you're just going and you got someone behind you that's just like, hey, you got two more in you, right? Like, and we need that. We need examples of that in all walks of our life. And I love how we're talking about family, we're talking about parenting, how to show up. And that's absolutely something we need more of.
Yeah, I work out at home as well. And it's funny, I still have a gym membership I pay for only because a good amount of the guys I meet in my man morning crew go there every Saturday. They work out there regularly, but they're always there
Mm-hmm.
on Saturday mornings.
Okay.
And I have that membership just so I can spend time with them
It's an
on
investment.
Saturday
Yeah.
mornings for that hour. And that's an investment. And like on
Yeah.
the surface, you're paying for a gym membership for 4 times and you go there 4 times a month. For me, it's worth it.
It might be. Yeah, it might be. So evaluate that, right? Like ask why. Well, Tony, we've covered so much ground. I knew this would be fantastic as far as all the topics covered, and I really appreciate your time sharing it and the space with me and all the listeners. But please, if there's anything you want to leave listeners with and where folks can find you.
Yeah. Well, first, I want to acknowledge you for the important work that you're doing and your commitment to this. You don't have to do this, and you still choose to invest your time, energy, and money to do this, and it makes a really big difference. So, props to you.
Thank you, man.
I don't think we give men and people in our lives enough props and say, "Hey, I see you." So, I see you, homeboy.
Thanks, man.
To learn more about me, go to theantonioneves.com. But for Man Morning, just head on over to manmorning.com. It's a free weekly newsletter that you're going to be very excited you signed up for.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, man.
Appreciate you.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.